From the battle in Harlem, we move to last night's primary winners and losers in Colorado and Connecticut. Our own Bob Schieffer and Chief Political Consultant Marc Ambinder join me now. Let's start first with the Colorado races and Bob Schieffer. Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, a Democrat, backed by President Obama. He wins.
This is a big deal, and it's especially a big deal for the Obama White House. You know, good news for the Obama White House has pretty much been on the endangered species list. I mean, they just haven't had any lately. And this was somebody that the president went out there and campaigned for. They really kind of put it all up on the line. But I think the even better news for Democrats in general is the way it went on the Republican side. This fellow, Ken Buck, who many people say, well, I know the Democrats are going to try to portray him as a sort of the Sharon Angle kind of candidate. That's the Tea Party woman who won out in Nevada. And, they thought that was the weakest possible candidate to run against Harry Reid, who everybody thought was going to lose. Democrats, at least, are saying this man could be that kind of a candidate. I mean, this was somebody that in this campaign said one of the reasons he should win the nomination because he didn't wear high heels like his opponent, who was a woman. And while these kinds of things may play well in primaries, they don't play well in a general election. So I think Democrats have, and especially the Obama White House part of the Democratic Party, really has a lot to be glad about this morning on what happened in Colorado.
Marc, if I'm correct, correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Michael Bennet was backed by President Obama. Andrew Romanoff got some last-minute support from former President Clinton, but that obviously that didn't pull him through or pull him ahead.
Didn't pull him through, although I think both endorsements helped. I think Bill Clinton's endorsement of Romanoff is what actually made it a two-person race. It really legitimized the idea that there are two candidates worth competing over. And what was very clear by how the polls, the vicissitudes of the polls, was how voters, Democratic voters, took their time, really took nothing for granted, really evaluated these candidates. I think we're seeing in this, it's cliche to say it, but anti-Washington, anti-establishment time, what it means for voters is they're just not going to, endorsements are nice, but they're really, really, really going to take the measure of each candidate and wait until the end to make choices.
Do you think Michael Bennet will now stay as cozy as he can or as closely tied to President Obama, or is this the time to sort of push away a bit?
Yeah, he's already creeping away from the White House. He's already said, well, he's not sure yet whether he wants President Obama to come campaign for him. And his campaign is they have a little bit of a bellyache because the White House is bragging so much about how much help they gave to Michael Bennet. And the last thing you want, aside from having senator before your name running in this cycle, is to be tied to Washington or the White House in a general election. So he is slowly inching away from some of the factors that helped get him elected in the primary.
All right, so Republican Ken Buck, who billed himself as an outsider, beat the Lieutenant Governor Jane Norton.
Yeah. The question for Republicans is whether Ken Buck is the got to put a duct tape over his mouth Tea Party candidate, or whether he can successfully transition into a more mainstream Republican candidate. He is perhaps more disciplined than Sharon Angle, the Republican candidate in Nevada, has a little more experience as district attorney, so knows how to make an argument at least, which is a plus in political campaigns. But he's very, very conservative, and even though we're in a midterm election when Republicans have an edge in the political environment, he is probably at this point too conservative for that state.
All right. Let's move on to Connecticut. And Bob, wrestling mogul Linda McMahon, a Republican, now faces Richard Blumenthal, the Democrat Attorney General for Senate. What are your observations?
I would nominate this as perhaps what will be the nastiest of all the contests come November. Linda McMahon brings her own set of kind of issues. I mean, do you take seriously somebody that headed up professional wrestling? There's a whole steroid issue here. There violence. There's all that kind of thing going. She spent a tremendous amount of her own money, which is, I think, the reason that she became a serious candidate.
She said she's going to spend $50 million.
She'll spend a lot more. But then on the other side, you got Richard Blumenthal, who was telling people about serving in Vietnam when it turned out, well, he actually was in the Army, but he didn't quite get to Vietnam, I think it was. So that's going to be an issue. But I think at this point, Blumenthal has a pretty substantial lead in the polls. The thing that I think came through last night, and I don't want to quote myself, but I said at but of course I will, as we all do. I said at the beginning of this cycle that I had felt that the Tea Party posed a much more serious threat to Republicans than it did to Democrats in general. And I think we saw a little of this last night. Yes, there's a big anti-establishment feeling going around in the country, but Republicans seem to take it out on their people, and the more conservative ones won in their things. It didn't seem to have that much of an impact on Democrats. Now, we'll see how all this plays out in November.
Well, McMahon is the underdog, but she pointed out that she was something like 40 points behind Blumenthal at one point, and she's narrowed that to something like 10 points. Is that gap closable for her?
Maybe in the scripted world of professional wrestling, it's perhaps easier for an underdog suddenly to defeat the reigning champion. But
now wait, wrestling is real.
Wrestling is real.
Isn't there that argument?
I went through a loss of faith when I was a child learning that it was fake, so please don't tell me it's real again,
Okay.
because that would just be
Go
be a mind bender for me. Linda McMahon made her money, the money that she's spending now, when she was the chief executive officer of World Wrestling Entertainment. So the company that she ran, she's running as a successful business person, except when you ask her about the company that she ran, she doesn't want to talk about it. Dick Blumenthal has a solid record of fighting against companies that do wrong, companies that have problems, that don't treat their workers correctly, and he's going to make a big issue out of WWE. He has, though, perhaps the taint of being a politician all of his life. So you have these competing dynamics. I think it's going to be a closer race than it is now, but I would say at this point Blumenthal probably has the edge, even though she's going to have a lot more money.
Blumenthal may be able to get past the Vietnam statement that he made, but I think voters sit there and wonder, even when politicians get past it, where these things come from.
Yeah.
Obviously, he knew whether he was in Vietnam or not, and it reminded me a little bit of the Hillary Clinton statement where she said she had ducked sniper fire in Bosnia.
Her war record.
Right.
Right, and there had been no sniper fire.
To try and tie it all back to Charlie Rangel a little bit, I think what it creates is a sense of, or it fosters the idea that politicians have this sense of entitlement where they can get away with misstatements, even egregious misstatements, politically sensitive misstatement. The last thing you want to do is misstate your service in Vietnam. That's something that even voters of my generation, who weren't alive back then, really understand. We know that that's not a good thing. And I think that gets to the heart of what a lot of voters think is wrong about Washington, and that's why when that is relitigated, that issue, during the general election campaign in Connecticut, it could hurt Dick Blumenthal quite a bit.